He's been dead for 8 years, but a notorious Sydney terrorist is still causing a security threat for the country he abandoned. 9 News can reveal tonight almost a third of the women and children caught in an immigration fight over ISIS are linked to Islamic State recruiter Mohammed Zahab.
When this group of 34 Australians drove out of the outrage refugee camp earlier this week, they thought they were leaving for good. Now back at the Syrian camp awaiting local travel permissions, their repatriation is being wholly opposed.
Anyone that goes to a designated terrorist hotspot like Syria and supports a death cult like ISIS doesn't belong here.
But of the 34, 20 are children, many of whom were born in Syria. Some of their mothers were active supporters of Islamic State.
But some were taken against their will by their husbands or their fathers. Some were tricked. Some were children when they went themselves, and they have now grown up and had children themselves.
9 News can reveal that at least 9 of the 34 are linked to Mohammed Zahab, a Sydney maths teacher and notorious Islamic State recruiter who died in a 2018 airstrike in Iraq. Among Mohammed's recruits, his brother Khaled, who was also killed in a coalition missile strike. Their younger brother, Yusuf, now languishes in an Iraqi jail. Mohammed Zahab is related or directly connected to 4 women in the camp. His 57-year-old mother, Aminah, sister Sumaya, cousin Nazreen and her cousin Janai Safar. The 3 younger women have 5 children among them. The youngest is 6.
These women, as part of that cohort, have children who are innocent, whose rights are being deprived and abused right now in this situation.
We can.
Viewers, if you believe that, if you don't think those children have been groomed to become ISIS fighters themselves, if you don't think they've been groomed into that culture, you're completely ignorant. You are completely unaware.
Cannot compromise our national security because there are children involved.
As it stands, all but one of the 34 stuck in Syria will be allowed to return to Australia on single-entry passports. But 9 News understands some of the women face being put on terrorist control orders, which allow greater monitoring of their movements. Andrew Probyn.
But first, the more that's discovered about those Islamic State women, some call them ISIS brides, I call them co-conspirators, the worse it looks for the Albanese government, the worse it looks for the Immigration Minister Tony Burke, and the worse it looks for the Prime Minister. Today, Anthony Albanese was left lamely repeating his previous lines that the government is not involved in repatriating these terrorist accomplices, all the while admitting that the government has been issuing them with passports because the Prime Minister says that's the law. Here he is.
People are having an implementation of Australian law is what is happening. We are providing no assistance to these people and won't provide any assistance to these people, but we won't breach Australian law.
Now, there's only one way to describe those words from the Prime Minister: lies. Absolute BS. And it says to me that he doesn't even know his own laws, or if he does, he's unwilling to enforce them. Here is Section 14 of the Australian Passports Act 2005. It is a Commonwealth piece of legislation, and it is and provides the laws that govern the issuance, the administration and the cancellation of Australian passports. It's this act that establishes that Australian citizens have a right to a passport, but crucially, at the same time, empowering the Minister to refuse or cancel such passports and to impose strict security measures. So the laws to grant the passport, but also the laws to take a passport away, as well as the laws to refuse one outright. And yet if you listen to the Prime Minister, he wants you to think his hands are tied, that anyone wanting an Australian passport must be given one. So what could the Prime Minister be doing now to stop these Islamic State women returning to Australia under existing laws? Section 14, have a look, here it is, of the Australian Passports Act. It says, if a competent authority, and that's basically a delegate of the Minister, suspects on reasonable grounds that the person to whom a passport might otherwise be issued, quote, might prejudice the security of Australia, the competent authority may make a refusal. So let's spell that out. The government is perfectly entitled to refuse to issue a passport to people who might be a security risk. And it has the laws now, right now, tonight, to do this. Meaning the reason these jihadi women are getting a passport to come to Australia is because the Albanese government wants them to have one. It is not that they can't stop them, they can. They have the laws now, but clearly not the political will. And how could these women not be a security risk under that act, given they knowingly left Australia and joined the listed Islamic State terror group? They broke the law to do it, let's not forget that at the time. They married hardened terrorists, they had children to hardened terrorists to breed the terrorists of the future, and have now spent years and years in camps, mostly populated by hardened terrorists. So, of course, the government could refuse to issue them passports. I've just outlined the case against these women. But clearly, as far as Labor's concerned, the Muslim lobby in seats like Tony Burke's in Sydney holds more sway over the Albanese government than the majority view of Australians. Now, we've known for some days that the great political ally of Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke is the prominent Sydney GP, Dr Jamal Rifi, and he has been in Syria trying to repatriate these terrorist accomplices. Today we learned via the Daily Telegraph newspaper that it was not just Dr Rifi there helping to get these Islamic State women back to Australia. There was, on the basis of what's in the paper, encrypted messages. A government delegate, it says, in the camp working with these ISIS women and doing DNA testing before handing over Australian passports. Indeed, the women's messages, translated from Arabic into English, reportedly say, and I quote, "The Australian government has concluded DNA tests for the sisters and children, issued Australian passports for them, and sent a delegation to accompany the families back to Australia." So the government that's supposedly not involved at all in any of this has not just had a key Labor political ally, Dr Rifi, over there. According to these messages, has actually sent a delegation to test the women and the children, to issue them passports, and to escort them back to Australia. Now, plainly, the government's up to their eyeballs in all of this. The Telegraph quotes a high-level security source, presumably someone who knows all about this delegation, saying, quote, "The government has been quietly making these repatriation plans for months." Now, these claims in the Telegraph today are explosive. And since the story broke today, Tony Burke has hidden from the media. And the Prime Minister, well, he's only held highly stage-managed events and avoided questions. Clearly, full and frank answers must now be given about this delegation. How big was it, or is it? Who is in it? Are we talking about officials, paid contractors, or, as has been rumoured to me when I was in Canberra, individuals with a Special Forces connection? So current or former Australian soldiers. And here's the question almost every Australian is asking tonight. How can a government that says it takes the safety and security of Australians seriously, just 2 months on from the worst terror atrocity ever committed in this country, allegedly inspired by Islamic State, connive to bring back Islamic State accomplices into Australia? Now, if you don't want terrorism in Australia, you don't import it. You don't bring in people who actively support it and maybe even participated in terrorism. Now, honestly, this is an outrage. This is an absolute outrage. Sure, these people are female and some are minors. But does anyone think that women and adolescents can't be terrorists? Wake up. You know they can. I know they can. Again, here is former Federal Police counter-terrorism expert David Craig.
It's my opinion that every single one of these ISIS brides is either fully radicalised or subservient to those that are. That's the only way you could end up in trying to be part of an Islamic caliphate and leave a peaceful country to go and do so. Now, either of those two, they are an unacceptable risk.
And yet tonight we know the Albanese government actively assisting potential terrorists to enter this country, close to betraying our country. Some would even say it is treasonous. There'd hardly be a person tonight not shaking their head angrily at the Prime Minister for letting the demands of terrorist sympathisers in Syria trump the rights of decent Australians to be safe in our own country.
Of the ISIS brides. Now, as Peter Credlin has said, citizenship, Australian citizenship, gives you the right or entitlement to a passport. But Section 14 of the Australian Passports Act does not require one to be issued. A minister can refuse, counsel or impose strict security measures. And the Act states that if a competent authority, and that could be a delegate of the minister, suspects on reasonable grounds that the person to whom a passport might otherwise be issued might prejudice the security of Australia, the competent authority may make a refusal. Joining me now, Shadow Home Affairs Minister Jono Duniam. Jono, given the wording of the Act, do you think passports should have been issued to this ISIS cohort?
Thanks for having me. And no, I don't think that passports should have been issued to anyone in this cohort. How anyone, a competent authority, a casual observer, the Minister or the Prime Minister could say that anyone in this ISIS bride cohort isn't going to cause some risk to our national security, isn't going to harm our way of life, baffles me. These are people that chose to go to Syria to participate in the life that they have, to support their ISIS fighter husbands, people who are not friends of Australia and our democratic ways. This is something that is incredibly concerning, and the fact that I think it has been reported 3 of these ISIS brides were apparently considered high risk. 1 has warranted a temporary exclusion order. Again, I don't understand why only 1 instead of all of the members of this cohort who could receive one of these exclusion orders hasn't. But the fact that they've been given a passport and the government say, oh, well, nothing we can do about it, demonstrates a government that isn't taking national security and their job seriously.
We're seeing this argument put forward by some that, these poor children, they didn't choose to go over there, they didn't make that decision. At the start of the show, I played news reports at similar Syrian ISIS camps showing just how radicalised the children are. I'd like to get your comment on that.
Well, the footage she showed at the beginning of the program there gave me goosebumps. Kids who should be playing with toys, building sandcastles, enjoying youth, saying the things that they did, gesticulating, slashing at the throat and things like that. I mean, I'm sorry, if we aren't alive to the risk that is posed by, indeed, these children, as well as the mothers of these children in these camps, then we are in a world of trouble. They've been in these camps for goodness knows how long. Some were born there, some went with their mothers to Syria from Australia, as far as I understand. To that end, radicalisation, as has been demonstrated in what you played earlier, is already a problem for these young people. So we cannot underestimate the risk, and we should not fall for these claims by groups who are saying we must bring them home for these children. I'm sorry, national security comes first. These people, these women and their husbands took these children to these camps with these lives ahead of them, and these are the consequences, and we cannot risk our national security by bringing them back.
Do you think there's a possibility that our federal agencies, some of them, might have been cut out of the loop here, because we've seen that the minister did have at least one closed-door meeting with Save the Children when the Home Affairs official was asked by the minister, by Tony Burke, to leave the room to discuss the return of the ISIS brides?
Well, something isn't right here, Shah. One of the meetings, these closed-door meetings, where the note taker from the department was asked to leave, of course, as you've probably pointed out already, had a fellow by the name of Dr. Jamal Rifi in attendance discussing this very issue. That individual has, of course, found himself in the Middle East assisting this group, by all reports, in trying to get them repatriated to Australia. So he has been playing a central role in repatriating these ISIS brides and their children to Australia. This, of course, is also a man, as we know, headed up the Friends of Burke re-election of Tony Burke campaign at the last election. So it may be the case that the agencies who should be providing this advice to the minister have been cut out of some of these arrangements. But again, these are all questions for the minister to answer, and none of them have been forthcoming today, yet the concerns keep mounting up.
Yeah. You mentioned there the handwritten note from Home Affairs Secretary Stephanie Foster. Were you actually grilled her over that? Let's have a look at those comments.
You're certain you don't recall whether the reference to Christina Kay at the beginning of these notes was Christina Keneally?
No, Senator. As I said, I would be speculating.
And Claire, would that be the Foreign Minister and the former Home Affairs Minister?
Again, Senator, I would be speculating.
About a quarter of the way down, there are 2 initials, TB. Now, can I understand from you, are they the initials of the Minister?
It's a matter of fact, Senator, that they are the Minister's initials.
And so to that end, does the fact that you've inscribed those there mean from that point on they are the comments made by the Minister?
Senator, I am not going to speculate about what I might have meant.
I mean, that's unbelievable. And in those notes, she underlined the word after, that help would be given after they've returned home. How did you find those responses?
Well, I have to say I respect Stephanie Foster immensely. She's one of the most professional public servants I've come across in my 10 years in Parliament. But I did find those responses slightly suboptimal. If I'd have been asking about someone else's handwritten notes, I could understand her not wanting to speculate. But these notes, that meeting was well reported in the media, and I'm not sure she knew what she was writing. So I found those disappointing. But at the end of the day, this again does point to the intention of the minister. They're claiming they've got no hand in this. The government's providing no response, no support, no efforts to repatriate. But all of these sort of back channel arrangements where they've tried to exclude the bureaucrats, points to something more insidious. And frankly, though, this just leads to risks to our national security. These are not friends of Australia he's trying to bring in, and that's the problem.
Seem to show otherwise. Joining us live, the new Shadow Defence Minister, James Patterson. James, it's good to see you this morning. So the government's still denying knowledge of any delegation which was claimed in these encrypted messages. So nothing to see here, it seems, James.
Well, this is just typical of the Albanese government and in particular of the Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, when it comes to matters of national security like this. They think they can get away with misleading the public. This is not the first repatriation of former ISIS brides to Australia on their watch. Of course, when the charity Save the Children sought to bring them to Australia, Tony Burke pretended he knew nothing about it. It later emerged he had secret meetings and told the public servant to leave the meeting. So, frankly, I have no confidence in anything the government says when it comes to these things. All we know is someone who left this country, a tolerant, prosperous, free liberal democracy, to go and join the Islamic State Caliphate, which persecutes people of ethnic and religious minorities underneath them, including using rape and torture and murder as weapons of war, is not someone that we want in this country, and the government should be doing everything they can to keep them out of this country, not rolling out the Welcome Act to bring them back.
So temporary exclusion has been issued to one of them, which was your wish, but it ends there. Do you think it should be replied to all of them?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The fact that one temporary exclusion order has been applied to one of these cohorts just demonstrates there is, in fact, a national security risk from these people. And I question why the entire cohort hasn't been slapped with temporary exclusion orders. And if the government says that the legal thresholds have not met, my colleague, Senator Jonathan Duniam, has already offered, on behalf of the coalition, bipartisan support to amend the law to protect Australians. Whatever is necessary to keep these people out of our country should be done.
So again, chatting to Matt Thistlethwaite this morning, I put that point to him. Shouldn't they be kept overseas while investigating? They said they haven't got any advice to suggest that they are a threat, therefore they'll likely be brought home. You say that's not good enough?
Well, Matt, here's some advice that suggests that they might be a threat. They went and joined Islamic State. They went and joined one of the most reprehensible terrorist organisations we've ever seen, a death cult that ruthlessly persecuted people under their control, that engaged in some of the most horrific acts of terrorism, and that has inspired terrorism all around the world, including, allegedly, the Bondi shooters who were found to have an Islamic State car, according to media reports, in their car on Bondi. So, I mean, if that's not enough advice for Matt Thistlethwaite and the Labor Party, then honestly, I wonder what it would take.
So that would relate to the adults, not so much the kids, though. So what do you do there?
Well, it has been previously the case under former governments that independent repatriation of minors occurred because essentially some of these children have become orphans while they're over there, and as Australian citizens, they were previously repatriated separately from adults. Now, if that is people's concern, then they should propose that instead. What we can't have is what appears to be, again, according to media reports, a freelance repatriation operation being run by Dr. Jamal Rufi. Now, he's a respected community leader, but no matter how respected you are, private citizens should not be importing associates of a listed terrorist organisation, and it is particularly suspicious that Dr. Jamal Rufi is such a close friend of Tony Burke. I mean, he ran the Friends of Tony Burke campaign in the last federal election to get the Home Affairs Minister re-elected in his seat.
I'm curious about this line that the government is maintaining, that it is not assisting in any way. And they say that it's not on them to issue the passports, it's others. Legally, they have to. So that's not... They're leaning on this as that's not exactly them helping. How do you bat that away?
Well, don't rely on my view. Professor Ben Saul, who is supportive of repatriating these people to Australia, has said in the Age and Sydney Morning Herald this morning that, of course, the government is assisting them, that granting the passports is assistance. It's also highly likely that the government has, again, provided citizenship by descent documents to any children born overseas to Australian parents. Now, this is not a straightforward process. This is not an easy process, particularly in a refugee camp in a region previously controlled by a terrorist organisation where the Australian government has no presence on the ground. I get constituent requests all the time of people who've had children overseas in peaceful areas in our own region who say it takes months, and sometimes even years, to get citizenship by descent and passport for their children where there is no security risk. So the fact the government has been able to do this so quickly, so easily in this case, does suggest that they are in fact rolling out the Welcome Act.
Well, and then you've got these encrypted messages, and I'll just elaborate a bit more on what they are. So according to the Daily Telegraph, here they are here. So it's through the women who are living in this Roj camp in northern Syria. It says the Australian government conducted DNA tests for the sisters and children, issued Australian passports for them, which we just talked about, and sent a delegation to accompany the families from the camp in Australia. I mean, does that not prove active involvement?
Well, if those reports are correct, then yes, that's exactly what it proves. It is a choice of the Australian government, either DFAT or Home Affairs or another agency, to send Australian officials in, I understand some years ago, to conduct these tests. There's no law which compels them to do that. And frankly, it's quite a dangerous area to operate, and you are taking risks with Australian government personnel if sending them in choice. That is a choice that this government appears to have made based on those media reports, and therefore it appears that they do want to take steps to facilitate the return of these people, despite what the Prime Minister has been disingenuously saying.
And just getting back to the point, I mean, even though it denies it and it leans on the legalities of it all, whether it's DFAT or whether it's Home Affairs, foreign, whatever, if you need to issue a passport, that in itself is government involvement, is it not?
Of course it is. It's assistance, it's involvement, it's a welcome mat, it is all of those things. If the Albanese government really wanted to keep these people out of our country, they could do so. It's very clear that's not what they want to do. We've offered bipartisan support to help them protect Australia because we don't want to see any increased risk beyond what we've already suffered over the last few years.
We'll leave it there. James Patterson.
And viewers, if you don't believe the Australian Prime Minister lies, watch this.
On this story, the group of ISIS brides and other issues, we've heard the Prime Minister speaking on a few of the developments a short time ago.
Has a security threat been made about them, and if so, what is it?
Well, we monitor all of these issues, but we are not repatriating these people.
How will you seek to stop them from coming to Australia then?
Well, we're not repatriating them.
Will you use, for example, the opposition's suggestion of a temporary exclusion order?
Well, what we will do on national security issues is we deal with it appropriately upon advice.
About today. Thank you.
The nurses training here at the Royal Children's Hospital are benefiting from paid prac. It's extraordinary that at a time where we...
Great bunch, aren't they? Iran in the chair on a couple of key committees.
Well, hold on. Isn't the United Nations, Chris, meant to be all about, standing up for the downtrodden, standing up for the oppressed, ensuring that we put in place better rules, etc. for them? Is this an absolute joke? Iran, as you said, are currently slaughtering their own people for standing up and begging for the freedoms that we have on a daily basis. I actually hope that Australia also endorsed what the USA said, disassociated ourselves from this vote, because it is a total joke and, quite frankly, undermines what the UN is meant to be doing.
Spot on. Australia's not immune from this, though, because we learned today that this country has given permanent residency to the daughter of a sanctioned Iranian military leader. Who took that decision? Was it the wrong decision, and can it be rescinded?
They are all the questions which the government should be answering. So we have on one hand, and we'll talk about that shortly, let's bring back in a whole lot of women and their kids who left Australia, turned their backs on us and everything we stand for, to go and actually live with terrorists. And then we wake up this morning to go, well, hey, hold on. Australia has listed the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. We have sanctioned this particular individual. Iran is currently slaughtering its own people who are out there begging for the freedoms that we have on a daily basis. But hey, this is a government who then gives permanent residency to the daughter of this sanctioned individual. This is not a normal routine immigration case, Chris. This is a national security case. You're either serious about sanctions or you're not. You're either serious about listing the IRGC as a terrorist organisation or you're not, and this government is clearly not serious.
Well, it is mind-boggling, as you say, from a national security point of view, because we know that there are Iranians in this country, Australian Iranians, who are living in fear of the outreach of this regime, which has been known to kill and persecute people in other countries, and yet they're letting into this country someone closely connected to the very worst elements of the regime.
Well, what is worse than that? What an insult to every Australian, but to every Jewish Australian, because if you recall, the IRGC were also found to be responsible for an act of terrorism on Australian soil. So again, those questions that you posed in your introduction are exactly the questions that this government should be answering. But more than that, I read a lot of the comments underneath the story. This is what I found interesting. The comments went to this effect: well, I've known someone from the US or from England who've been here for 10 years and they can't get permanent residency. Yep. So I have to say, I mean, Jesus, who is this government actually bringing into this country, and who are they stopping from coming into this country? This is a government that is not standing up for Australia and Australian values, and they should be made, Chris, to basically explain to Australians how this decision was made.
Well, that brings us to the so-called ISIS brides. Now, we know that the government has to be proactive in allowing these returns to happen, because travel documents need to be issued. There has to be passports issues, visas issues. You don't just turn up. You can't get on a plane to Australia unless you've actually had all this documentation handled. Now, two questions here, really. I mean, the government's pretending this is all basically happening without it even knowing what's going on. That's ridiculous. The minister oversees this. And secondly, under law, do they have the right to actually refuse passports to these people?
OK, so in the first instance, you now have Australia, a Prime Minister who is blatantly lying to your face. Identity checks, DNA checks, passports being issued, documents for travel being prepared. I'm going to do something really unparliamentary and I'm going to call bullshit on this Prime Minister. You are lying to the Australian people. You are assisting these women and their children who turned their back on Australia to come back here. Do not treat Australians as mugs. But Chris, this is actually the bigger deception. It's in relation to the temporary exclusion orders. The Minister keeps on saying, I haven't got the national security advice. What the Minister is forgetting to tell the Australian people is that under Section 10 of the relevant Act, the Minister does not need the advice of the security agencies. The Minister can form his own reasonable suspicion that keeping these women out of our country would assist in ensuring that there is not a terrorist-related event on Australian soil. So the Minister is hiding behind our security agencies when he himself could form a reasonable suspicion. Now, let me give you the facts, though, because the Minister will say, Michaelia is wrong. I need the security agencies to actually give me that reasonable suspicion. Wrong. These women left Australia to go to an ISIS-controlled territory. These women lived in an ISIS-controlled territory whilst the terrorists committed acts of genocide and global terrorist events. These women either married or associated with ISIS fighters. These women have spent the last 6 years in camps specifically for ISIS families. Worse, they've chosen to come back to Australia but a few months after the most significant terrorist-related event this country has ever seen. Now, I don't know about you, Chris, but if Minister Burke cannot form a reasonable suspicion on those publicly available facts, then I just don't know what you actually need. He could issue temporary exclusion orders this afternoon against every single one of these individuals, and as Angus Taylor has so articulately said, shut the door.
Worry, and that argument was brilliantly articulated there, Michaelia Cash. I appreciate it. Thanks.
So Australia's ISIS bride scandal is recurring national argument where national security, citizenship rights and humanitarian duty all collide, loudly and usually in front of cameras. It centres on apparently Australian women and their children who ended up who chose to go to a Kurdish-run detention camp in northeast Syria after the ISIS collapse, but they supported the ISIS terrorists for over 6 years, and the ongoing fight over whether Australia should repatriate them, prosecute them, exclude them or leave them there indefinitely is all over the news. Now, number one, how does this become an Australian scandal? After ISIS lost territory in 2019, thousands of women and children linked to ISIS fighters were held in camps like Al-Hol and Al-Roj in northeast Syria, including Australians who were supporting the terrorists. The scandal label's stuck because it's not just policy, it's emotion plus politics. People see either security threat or abandoned kids, and then everyone yells. Now, the abandoned kids are the next generation ISIS fighters. They're being groomed over there to follow in the male footsteps that were mentoring them. Number two, the two competing frames and why it never ends. Security first argument. Concerns include potential radicalisation, unknown identities, evidence challenges, and the fear that returnees could pose a risk. Governments also argue the women made choices that endangered their children, but they didn't care about that. The reason is because they groomed the children to become the next generation fighters. Humanitarian and legal argument. Critics argue children are victims, camps are unsafe, and that Australia should bring citizens home and deal with alleged crimes for Australia courts rather than leaving people in legal limbo overseas. Well, they made their bed, as Anthony Albanese said, and what his mum recommends, they should lie in it. Number three, what Australia has actually done, the repatriation history. Australia has conducted repatriations in past years, including a public announced return of 4 women and 13 children in October 2022. Legal and advocacy efforts have also played out in court, including a federal court decision rejecting a habeas type application, arguing the Commonwealth controlled the detainees, and the court found it did not. Number 4, the current flashpoint, February 2026. In February 2026, reporting describes a cohort of 34 Australian women and children who left the Roach camp trying to travel but were forced back after the attempt collapsed. Australian officials and commentators are disputing what support was or wasn't provided, including reporting about passport, travel documents, and at least one person facing a temporary exclusion type measure. Parallel concern. Separating reporting says Australian men suspected of being ISIS fighters were among detainees transferred from Syria to Iraq, and raising due process and death penalty concerns. So number 5, why it's so hard to solve. The evidence in jurisdiction providing specific offences committed in a war zone is difficult even when suspicions are strong. Citizenship rights versus exclusion tools. Governments can use measures like temporary exclusion orders in some cases, but citizenship and the right to return creates legal and political constraints. Kids stuck in the middle, they're the human reality that breaks simplistic arguments and the reason the story keeps resurfacing, but the children stuck in the middle are the next generation ISIS fighters. So, in conclusion, viewers, the ISIS bride scandal in Australia persists because it's not one problem, it's 3. Number 1, how to manage legitimate security risk. My solution to that is don't let them come back. Number 2, how Australia treats its citizens when they're stuck in brutal overseas detention. Well, they chose to be there and that's their problem. And number 3, how to handle children who didn't choose any of it. Well, they're going to be the next generation of ISIS fighters, so you better choose very carefully how you're going to do that. Every time a group tries to move, a court case lands or a minister comments. The same clash reignites. Bring them back and prosecute, keep them out or leave them there and pretend that a policy's instead of a pause button. So policies over pause. Viewers, that's it for this take. I'll catch you later.